evening. It's the 10th of September 2022. Welcome to the Prime Time News here on TV1. For the News First team, where the people come first, I'm Senita Senanayaka. Before we take a look at the stories in detail, let's take a look at the headlines. USAID Administrator Samantha Power announces $40 million for Sri Lankan farmers. Aragale activist Lahiru Weerasekara granted bail, admitted to National Hospital for treatment. Lawyer Nuwan Bopage heads to Geneva to brief UNHRC. Amnesty International calls for UNHRC to strengthen oversight of Sri Lanka. Charles III proclaimed king in historic ceremony. Supply of coal suspended until allegations levelled are legally resolved, says supplier. On to your top story this evening, USAID Administrator Samantha Power, who is currently on a two-day official visit, said that $40 million will be granted to Sri Lanka from the United States in order to assist 1 million farmers in the country. Samantha Power made the announcement during a News First exclusive after meeting with farmers in Jayala earlier today.
USAID Administrator Samantha Power, who is currently on a two-day official visit, arrived in Sri Lanka on Saturday morning. USAID Administrator Samantha Power said the $40 million funding is expected to help farmers to obtain the agricultural necessities and fertilizer they need in time for the next harvesting season, and will also help to provide for their families and communities. The USAID Administrator is currently on a two-day visit to Sri Lanka and is due to meet with government officials, private sector representatives as well as farmers and other Sri Lankans most impacted by the complex emergency to discuss how their lives have been affected by the current crisis. She also met with farmers in Jayala and discussed the hardships they faced. Pointing out that the USA has a history of working with Sri Lankan people to spur economic development to support the resilience of Sri Lankans, USAID Administrator Power said that it had become a difficult time for farmers to continue their livelihood. Citing a World Food Programme report about food insecurity in Sri Lanka, Administrator Power said it is a consequence of the economic crisis in Sri Lanka.
How is life different for you now?
She also emphasized that the USA stands by Sri Lankans at this time of vulnerability and looks forward to meeting more representatives within the two-day visit.
The farmers that I just met with described the enormous challenges that the economic crisis has placed on them and their families. They described a phenomenon that were unimaginable 2-3 years ago. You know, having grown accustomed to being able to buy fish in the market, now in some cases being forced only to eat local leaves and not being able to bring home to their children the biscuits that their children had become accustomed to. According to the World Food Programme, more than 6 million people, nearly 30% of Sri Lanka's population, are currently food insecure and require humanitarian assistance. And obviously that is a really big change for this country, and it is the consequence of the economic crisis that Sri Lankans know so well. Today, here, having talked to these farmers and heard about their needs, I am announcing an additional $40 million in assistance to Sri Lanka from the American people. Through USAID, this new funding is going to help 1 million local farmers get the fertilizer and the agricultural necessities they need just in time for the next planting season. So what we are doing with this $40 million support is really focusing on these critical inputs, the things that farmers need to ensure the kinds of harvests that we know these paddies are capable of producing. This assistance will help farmers like the ones I met today weather this emergency phase and provide for their families and their communities. And just to be clear, USAID and the United States stands with Sri Lanka at this time of great vulnerability and great need. And I look forward over the course of the next couple days to talking to more Sri Lankans, talking to officials, to gain insight as to how best the U.S.-Sri Lankan partnership, which has been so substantial and so important for so long, how best we can meet this very difficult time.
Ambassador, you spoke to the farmers today and they echoed the sentiment of all the farmers in the country that it faced fertilizer prices and fuel shortage as well. And recently in New Delhi, when you were speaking to Foreign Minister Jaishankar at a program in New Delhi in July, you said that you were deeply concerned about the crisis ongoing in Sri Lanka, especially agriculture. You still maintain that position, or have you seen any improvement, or has it deteriorated?
I mean, first let me say that one of the most important topics of conversation during my trip to India was the crisis in Sri Lanka. We have been very appreciative, as I know so many Sri Lankans have been, of India stepping forward and providing financial assistance and loans and lines of credit, particularly at the height of the crisis. And we join with India and all friends of Sri Lanka and friends of the Sri Lankan people in supporting Sri Lanka as it seeks to obtain the IMF program that it has reached preliminary agreement on, but that needs to be seen through. And so certainly I think progress that has been made in the engagements with the IMF are significant. That's not something that had reached that stage when I was in India. I think there are still very large questions about debt distress in this country, how the government can and Sri Lankans can get access to the kind of credit that they need to keep the economy fueled. I will be meeting later this evening with Sri Lankan private sector actors, business leaders as well, to hear about what more the United States can do, but also how the private sector feels the crisis is being managed or needs to be managed, what adjustments need to be made, what reforms need to happen, and how they should be prioritized. And so I think that is what is so heartbreaking, is there are a set of dynamics beyond the control of ordinary people that have left ordinary people and vulnerable people facing challenges the likes of which they have not encountered before.
The Maligakanda Additional Magistrate ordered the release of Aragala activist Lahiru Weerasekara on 2 personal bails of 200,000 rupees each.
Aragala activist Lahiru Weerasekara was arrested on Duplication Road in Colombo. Sri Lanka Police spokesperson SSP Attorney at Law Nihal Taldua told Newsfirst that Weerasekara was arrested for obstructing the duties of police officers during a protest in Maradana, being party to an unlawful assembly, and on several other charges.
Lahiru Weerasekara was about to head back home on my motorcycle following the protest at Galface last evening. A police jeep obstructed us in Kolpeti along Duplication Road. They pulled Lahiru from the back.
Lahiru Weerasekara, who was detained at the Maradana police station until Saturday morning, was directed to the National Hospital in Colombo after he fell ill and consulted a doctor. The Maligakanda Additional Magistrate visited Lahiru Weerasekara at the National Hospital in Colombo on Saturday afternoon and ordered he be released on 2 personal bails of 200,000 rupees each.
Some form of assault had taken place when arresting Lahiru Weerasekara. The magistrate's attention was drawn to this matter as well. The magistrate took notes of the relevant scenario. Meanwhile, Minister of Foreign Affairs President's Council Ali Sabri met with officials at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Minister of Foreign Affairs President's Council Ali Sabri has met with the President of the UN Human Rights Council. Taking to Twitter, Minister of Foreign Affairs President's Council Ali Sabri said discussions with the UN Human Rights Council President Federico Villegas focused on the key areas including Sri Lanka's continued engagement to improve human rights practices and partnering to face the present challenges. Minister Sabri further reiterated the importance of strengthening domestic mechanisms. Ali Sabri and the Justice Minister, President's Council Vijay Dasa Rajapaksa also met with Acting UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada Al-Nashif. They held discussions on the progress Sri Lanka has made and the current steps being taken to improve human rights practices in Sri Lanka. Amnesty International has called for the United Nations Human Rights Council to strengthen its oversight of Sri Lanka during the crisis triggered by the political and economic collapse. Amnesty International has urged the United Nations Human Rights Council to strengthen the existing Sri Lanka Accountability Project of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and to set up an expert mechanism on Sri Lanka to monitor, report, provide recommendations on human rights concerns that are at the core of the current crisis. In a statement, Amnesty International said, quote, Sri Lanka has a long history of crimes under international law and serious human rights violations, including many that are recent. The Sri Lankan government's unwillingness to address questions of accountability, rampant impunity, targeted weakening of independent institutions and redress mechanisms, as well as the lack of checks and balances, abuse of power, nepotism and corruption have collectively contributed to the current crisis. It also went on to note, quote, the recent change in the presidency following the unprecedented popular public protests has not addressed the root causes and the negative trends that led to this crisis, end quote. The human rights group also highlighted that on the 8th of August, UN experts warned Sri Lanka of its misuse of emergency measures, but violations continued in contravention of Sri Lanka's international obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Commenting on the Prevention of Terrorism Act, Amnesty International pointed out that the legislation has disproportionately targeted government critics, journalists and minorities to date. Amnesty International urged the UNHRC to vote for a resolution to set up an expert mechanism on Sri Lanka that can report annually to the UNHRC with additional reports to the UN General Assembly for an initial period of 2 years at a minimum, with a mandate to number 1, act as an independent international observer and analyst, monitor and report on the human rights implications of the current crisis. Number 2, review previous findings by UN entities, including those by OHCHR, UN Special Procedure Mechanisms, UN treaty bodies and other relevant mechanisms, as well as human rights commitments made by the Sri Lankan government, and present a comprehensive report. Number 3, vote to extend the mandate of the Sri Lanka Accountability Project for a minimum of 2 years and include provisions to strengthen the project. Amnesty International called on the UNHRC to urge the Sri Lankan government to number 1, repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and issue an immediate moratorium on its use in the interim period, review the detention of those held under the PTA, immediately release all those not facing internationally recognizable charges, ensure all PTA detainees, including those undergoing pre-trial detention, are tried promptly and fairly in a regular court and are provided access to legal counsel on a confidential basis and to family members and friends at regular intervals. Number 2, end the crackdown on peaceful protesters that is having a chilling effect on the freedom of expression, opinion and peaceful assembly. Number 3, bringing in the necessary legislative changes to deliver on their respective mandates as established. Number 4, promptly accede to the Roman Statute of the International Criminal Court and implement it fully under national law. The Human Rights Group also urged the UN member states to explore other options to advance accountability internationally in the absence of credible domestic processes, in line with the recommendation made by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The medical professionals of Sri Lanka for system change have demanded an immediate stop to the continuing arrests and incarceration of peaceful activists under the guise of imaginary charges.
In a statement, the medical professionals Sri Lanka for system change appealed to the president and his government to rethink their strategy and do their utmost to give relief to the suffering masses. The statement urged the civil society groups, other organizations and the general public to strengthen their resolve and protest with all peaceful means available to them, not allowing authorities to, quote, continue businesses as usual, end quote. The statement highlights that one of the IMF recommendation is supposed to be to cut down government expenditure drastically. Thus, people were taken by surprise and much dismay when the president went ahead appointing at least 37 new state ministers. It said, quote, although claiming to receive only an MP salary, all the perks, allowances and other facilities that go to support a minister will no doubt cost billions to the public. As a result, all the corrupt lawmakers responsible for making the country bankrupt in the first place are now firmly re-established in the saddles of power, end quote.
National organizer of the Samagi Vanitha Balavegaya, Hirunika Premachandra, visited the prison premises.
Today she asked me to say a few things. Firstly, how she and the rest of the prisoners suffer. These people are not capable of suppressing characters like Damita, characters like Lahiru Veerasekara, characters like Vasanta, because this Aragalaya was carried out very peacefully. They're trying to remand them by making various false accusations. That's what happened to Damita Abhiratna. It is very sad. Not one of these people did anything wrong to Ranil Rajapaksa. These are all Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa's contracts.
National People's Power parliamentarian Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who visited actress Damita Abhiratna at the prison, was obstructed today.
Two lawyers came here with me. They didn't let me in. They took about 45 minutes to let me in. I wasn't allowed to see Damita. I don't understand why it was this difficult, but eventually I managed to see her. She isn't feeling well. This is disappointing. Those who should be in prison are sitting in powerful places.
Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa says, while the forces that bankrupted the country are living in peace, the young men and women who fought for the country are being sent to jail. The person who bankrupted the country, who was known as the Crow, the one with 7 brains, today he is flying overseas. He is said to be flying to America. But those who raised their voices for the people, like Lahiru, are going to jail. Damita was sent to jail. What is the point of this? Former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was ousted, returns to Sri Lanka. But Lahiru and Damita are going to jail. Is that right? The violence was created by none other than Mahinda Rajapaksa. This terror was created by the gang, which gathered at the temple trees led by him. Today, this government is using the PTA to hunt down ordinary citizens who joined the Aragalaya. We must stand against this.
Attorney-at-Law Nuwan Bopage left for Geneva today to participate in the 57th UNHRC sessions. According to the Inter-University Students' Federation, Attorney-at-Law Nuwan Bopage was allowed to join the UNHRC sessions in his active involvement in the People's Aragalaya at Gaulface in Colombo. He will also brief the UNHRC about the suppression of student activists in Sri Lanka. The Human Rights Council will hold its 51st regular session from the 12th of September to the 7th of October in Geneva.
We are working towards creating a people's mandate at national and international level with regard to the unlawful arrests by the police as well as the attacks and harassment committed during these arrests. It is for this purpose that a mass protest is underway. Samagi Janabalavegaya parliamentarian Velusamy Radhakrishnan questioned the motive behind the appointment of 37 new state ministers. I have served as the State Minister of Education. President Ranil Wickremesinghe also recently invited us to join the all-party government. But if you look carefully, no party has decided to join him yet. Now he has appointed 37 new state ministers, and they say that they will not receive salaries. But there isn't a big difference between state ministers' salaries and parliamentarian salaries. It is only about 25,000 to 30,000 rupees. We doubt that they are giving up on any other allowance. A state minister is given a private secretary, 2 to 3 coordinating secretaries, media secretaries and 4 to 5 coordinators. When you add these factors, a state minister is given about 1 million rupees per month. Also, consider the diesel and petrol used by these state ministers for their vehicles and the drivers for these vehicles. It is up to the people to decide if this is the right thing to do at a time like this. Millions are being spent on compensation for the MPs' houses that were set on fire. They are given houses as well. That is a double win for them. People have been affected as well, but nothing was done to compensate the people. A bicycle protest rally against repression and injustice was held in Colombo today.
The protest rally started at Independence Square in Colombo and concluded at the Liberty Roundabout. A tense situation arose when Sri Lanka police announced that the protesters cannot engage in their demonstrations.
So basically these people are just using technical provisions of the law to suppress the innocent and innocent people of this country. That is what is happening here. So we will not stop. The people cannot be stopped. People have nothing to lose. People go into jail for remand. They have nothing to lose because at home they don't have their bread. When the people start to come and they start to do protest, when they arrest, they will not stop. This is yesterday. It was very clear. The people gave a very clear message. Government use of law against innocent people and the right of protest and expression cannot be used, and it will never prosper because people will always rise up against it.
Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
Newsfirst, main sponsor.
Anka ege arakshita iti gini petti. Surya gini petti. Lovatama eliya denna dilena Surya. Amataka vinne manati namake Surya. Mohotin dalvena gini kura Surya. Kavadat namagat gini petti Surya. Kavadat namagat gini petti Surya. Kavadat kotanat samage vishwase dinagat. Anka ege arakshita iti gini petti. Surya gini petti.
It was the government which said that it decided to increase the price of milk powder in order to promote the dairy milk industry. However, dairy farmers across the country say they've received no assistance from the government to develop the local milk industry.
This is the situation of the dairy farmers in Hambantota. They say the grasslands required to maintain their dairy cattle and provide them with adequate food is not sufficient. They added that they have no way of providing medicine required for their livestock.
We can't even afford a packet of rice. We are helpless. Customers don't want to purchase our milk for 180 rupees. The government does not pay attention to this matter. Veterinarians also don't care. Medicine, which used to cost 75 rupees, now costs 320 rupees. When we sell a litre of milk for 110 rupees, how can we afford medicine for the cattle? Veterinarians also charge money from us for the service they provide.
Despite the increase in cost, a proper price is yet to be provided for milk.
වතුර ලීටර් එකකට වැඩි අඩු මිලක් තමයි කිරි වලට අද ගෙවන්නේ. කිරි ලීටර් එකක් 110යි වතුර ලීටර් එකක් 130යි. අපිට මේ විදිහට මේක කරගෙන යන්න විදියක් නැහැ දැනට.
Dairy farmers in Kantale face a similar situation. According to these farmers, more than 400 families are left with no option but to stop breeding livestock.
The government says they are supporting the dairy farming families, but we are yet to receive any assistance from the government. Recently they brought cows from Malaysia and other places, but we didn't get any. We don't have grasslands to maintain our livestock. There is no reasonable price for milk yet.
The breakdown of local manufacturing industries is one of the reasons for the devastating economic crisis in the country. Successive governments may have emphasized the dire need for a self-sufficient dairy industry, but dairy farmers have not benefited from any decision that was made for the dairy industry in Sri Lanka. Let's revisit the decision taken to import heifers to Sri Lanka. Successive governments were bombarded with allegations over the importation of dairy heifers, and Newsfirst reported the tainted decision back in 2014 for the first time. Hundreds of dairy heifers exported to Sri Lanka to set up a dairy program allegedly died in appalling conditions, and those that survived did not benefit the local farmer in dairy production. The Yahapalana government, elected to power in 2015, continued this process in the years 2017 and 2018 as well. They imported 5,000 dairy heifers to support the dairy industry. The Yahapalana government, which was in power at the time, took this decision, ignoring the special reports submitted by the Auditor General on the matter. The Yahapalana government came into power after the downfall of the previous government. The Yahapalana government could have scrapped this agreement if they wanted to, but they just went ahead with it instead. And this is the fate befallen on the local dairy farmer that accepted the imported dairy heifers. The Presidential Commission of Inquiry that was appointed by the Government of Good Governance to investigate large-scale fraud and corruption revealed damning details surrounding the importation of dairy heifers. It was revealed at the Presidential Commission of Inquiry that these heifers had been traced with bovine viral diarrhea virus infection, and there were no facilities in Sri Lanka to provide the necessary treatment. Australian media reported on the matter as well. This project was implemented multiple times, and successive governments imported the dairy heifers from one supplier identified as Wellard Rural Exports Propriety Limited. According to the Auditor General, selected Wellard Rural without calling for tenders. The animal quarantine reports revealed that Sri Lankan farmers could not obtain the desired level of output to support the local dairy industry from these heifers because of the bovine viral diarrhea virus infection, and that there is a high risk of this virus spreading to local heifers as well. Who is responsible for the downfall of the local dairy farmer?
First with the people.
Speaking to CNBC, the chief of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, urged for large creditor nations such as China to show leadership and move rapidly to enable debt relief to countries such as Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is a case in hand. We know that the situation is much worse for low-income countries. Over 60% of low-income countries are at or near debt distress. Even countries with strong fundamentals are becoming vulnerable. When I look at low-income countries, I am really worried. My message to the creditors, especially the large creditors, like China, 37% of loans to low-income countries are from China, or the private sector, which is even a bigger creditor, is you have done a needed job to provide financial resources for growth. That is not necessarily bad, but in the environment of these shocks, when that is not sustainable, show leadership, move rapidly to provide debt relief to countries so we can help them. They can step up on their feet, they can grow again, and be a viable investment opportunity.
Charles III was proclaimed as king at a ceremony at St. James' Palace on Saturday. Charles became king immediately following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, but a ceremony formally confirmed his role on Saturday. It is the first time the historic ceremony has been televised. During the Accession Council, the king approved the day of the Queen's funeral becoming a bank holiday, although it is not known when it will take place. The king attended the second part of the ceremony to hold his first meeting of the Privy Council, the group of senior politicians who advised the monarch. The ceremony was attended by 200 members of the Privy Council, including former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson, Theresa May, David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and John Major.
I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world.
Do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. God save the King!
Is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip.
The proclamation ceremony at the Royal Exchange, the second and last such ceremony in London, was also held on Saturday. Further proclamations will be read in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales at noon on Sunday.
Do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. God save the King! God save the King!
The late Queen Elizabeth II's coffin will be carried on Saturday from Balmoral Ballroom by a party of bearers consisting of the Balmoral Estate Head Keep and 6 other keepers. The Queen's official bagpipe player and the piper to the sovereign will walk ahead with the coffin as it leaves by hearse. The Queen's body will then be moved to Holyrood, her residence in Scotland's capital Edinburgh, where a military guard of honour will meet it. The King on Friday pledged to follow what he called his darling Mama's life of service in an emotional first address.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Taking a look back at local news, Minister Kanchana Vijayasekara says the supplier who made the lowest bid has been informed to halt the supply of coal until the allegations raised against them are properly addressed. During a meeting held yesterday, he said that accordingly they discussed alternative proposals for the procurement of coal in order to resolve the matter. Sri Lanka police, who are protecting the law and order in the country, are also preparing themselves on a mission to bring in dollar revenues to Sri Lanka as they embark on their 156th police anniversary.
The People's Police.
For the first time in Sri Lankan history, a team of policemen will be joining an international peacekeeping mission called the Formed Police Unit. A team has now successfully completed 8 weeks of intensive training.
දැනට විශේෂකාර්ය බලකායට ආරාධනාවක් ලැබිලා තියෙනවා.
200 officers of the Special Task Force of Sri Lanka have been invited to partake in an international peacekeeping mission. The STF will take on international missions in the near future. 200 police officers will represent Sri Lanka in the United Nations peacekeeping mission.
විශේෂකාර්ය බලකාය ජාත්‍යන්තරය දක්වා විහිදෙනවා.
The duties of the Sri Lanka police officers joining this international UN peacekeeping mission are to protect UN personnel as well as properties belonging to the UN, to maintain public peace and to support other international units in times of emergency. The Sri Lankan economy will benefit with $1.9 billion from this UN peacekeeping mission annually.
The People's Police.
Day 6 of the 4th edition of the Divisavia program, seeking to support the most impoverished communities in Sri Lanka, was held on Saturday.
Day 6 of the 4th phase of the Divisavia program, supported by LOLC Holdings, got underway on Saturday. Essential relief packages were delivered to families in 3 separate areas of the Gampha district. Under the Divisavia program, essential goods are being distributed to low-income families facing serious financial difficulties across Sri Lanka.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Prime Time News here on TV1. For more details on these stories, you can log on to our website, that is www.newsfirst.lk. For the News First team, I've been Senita Sena Nayak. Take care and stay safe.